Back in 2004, right after I graduated from high school, I got my college acceptance letter. I had 2 months before classes started, so I decided to get a summer job to help my family out with expenses. My old middle school friend, Leo, was working as a server at a farmstead resort. When he heard I was looking for a job, he got me a spot waiting tables with him. I never could have imagined that the resort was hiding a terrible secret. Don't come back too late, and definitely don't go wandering around the grounds. Things haven't been too peaceful around here lately. It was a slow day, so we got off early. Leo and I went to an internet cafe and didn't get back until late. As we walked through the main gate, old Donald, the night watchman, hit us with that cryptic warning. We could tell something was off. Leo quickly handed him a cigarette. Old Donald, what do you mean, not peaceful? I don't get it. Old Donald took the cigarette. You guys know Mike suddenly quit, right? Mike was another server at the resort and my roommate, so of course I knew he'd left that day. Yeah, we know, I said. What about it? Do you know why he quit? Old Donald leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Last night, Mike was out late, just like you two. On his way back to the dorm, he heard a woman's voice behind him asking, "I'm looking for my husband. Do you know where he is?" Mike figured it was one of the staff's family members who'd gotten lost, so he turned around to ask who her husband was. But when he did, he saw a woman in a red dress standing there, with blood pouring from her eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Mike fainted on the spot. When he woke up, he was lying in the middle of the guest house courtyard, with pieces of yellow spirit money scattered all over him. That's why he quit. He packed his bags first thing this morning. Said the boss couldn't pay him enough to stay another day. Hearing this in the middle of the night sent a chill down our spines. Come on, old Donald, Leo said. You're not just trying to scare us, are you? Mike told me himself right before he left. Believe it or don't. Old Donald paused, then leaned in again, his voice even lower. Honestly, this isn't the first or second time this place has been haunted. You know we're mostly a spot for card games and mahjong, so we rarely get overnight guests. That means I'm the one who handles anyone staying in the guest house courtyard. Last weekend, the guests staying there all came to me in the middle of the night to complain. They said they kept hearing footsteps in the courtyard, or the sound of a woman and a child crying. But whenever they opened their doors, there was no one there. Anyway, a lot of strange stuff has been happening in the courtyard lately. David, the boss, thinks the rival resort next door is trying to sabotage us. He told me to keep a closer eye on things at night. Old Donald said he was only telling us because we were good kids who always shared our cigarettes with him. He didn't want us to get scared by whatever was lurking on the grounds. Just be careful, he finished. The whole resort feels off these days, especially the courtyard. Don't go wandering over there at night. If you run into something unclean, it'll scare you to death. Even though old Donald warned us to stay away from the courtyard, he was known for exaggerating. Leo and I didn't take him too seriously. We just figured he was spinning a yarn to spook us. We said goodnight and headed back to our dorm. By the time we got there, the hot water was already off. If we wanted to shower, we'd have to haul hot water all the way from the boiler room. The boiler room was a long walk from the employee dorms. But since the guesthouse courtyard was empty tonight, Leo and I just grabbed our clothes and toiletries and carried the hot water to the bathroom there, which was much closer. The guesthouse was a traditional quad-style building. As you entered the main gate, there were 3 guest rooms on the left and 3 on the right. In the center of the courtyard was a flower bed with an old pomegranate tree. It only had a few main branches left, but it was covered in lush, green leaves and a full bloom of flowers as red as blood. For some reason, that tree always gave me an uneasy feeling. The red of the flowers was just a little too bright, too jarring. With old Donald's stories fresh in my mind, I felt a persistent chill on my back as I showered in the bathroom stall. In a moment of morbid mischief, I decided I shouldn't be the only one scared. "Leo," I called out, "you think what old Donald said about this place being haunted is true?" "I hope so," Leo's carefree voice came from the next stall. "The ghosts on TV are always hot. I'm almost 20 and I've never even had a girlfriend. If a pretty ghost showed up right now, I'd be happy to get to know her better." "You're that desperate for a woman you'd hit on a ghost?" I joked. "You're not worried she'd suck you dry?" Leo let out a weird, theatrical laugh. "Bring it on. I'm ready to be sucked dry." The moment he said it, we heard footsteps come down the outdoor corridor and into the bathroom. Then, a woman's voice, slow and reedy, drifted over the stall walls. "Are you done yet? How much longer will you be?" I wiped the soap from my face and answered without thinking, "Almost done." But as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized something was wrong. First, there was no one else in the entire guesthouse courtyard this late. And second, this was the men's bathroom. What was a woman doing in here? My heart skipped a beat. Forgetting the soap still on my face, I frantically pulled on my shorts and pushed open the stall door. "Who's there? Who was that?" Leo sensed it too. He cracked his stall door open and peered out, on high alert. "Ben, who was that? Did someone walk into the wrong bathroom?" "I don't know, I don't see anyone." I thought it was a prank, but when I called out again, no one answered. I started pushing open the other stall doors, one by one. Nothing. Not a soul. The woman's voice had appeared out of thin air and vanished just as quickly. Suddenly, old Donald's ghost stories flooded my mind. A cold dread seeped up from the floor. "Leo," I whispered, "you don't think it was actually a ghost, do you?" "Ghost? A ghost?" Before I could even process it, Leo let out a terrified shriek and bolted out of his stall, not even bothering to put on his shorts. He ran out of the bathroom, ass naked. I was speechless. I glanced back at the empty bathroom behind me. The chill on my spine turned to ice. I threw on my clothes and sprinted out of there. Later, Leo must have been deeply embarrassed about his naked dash for safety. To buy my silence, the notoriously stingy guy actually paid for a full week of gaming for me at the internet cafe. One night, after pulling an all-nighter at the cafe, Leo and I got back to the resort early the next morning. An ambulance was parked at the entrance, surrounded by a crowd of onlookers, a mix of local residents and resort staff. Everyone was pointing and murmuring. A few moments later, several paramedics emerged from the resort, carrying a man on a stretcher with old Donald's help. They loaded him into the ambulance and drove off. As the siren faded into the distance, Leo and I, completely clueless, went over to ask old Donald what had happened. What was that all about? Why the ambulance? Who was that guy? He was a guest, old Donald said, his eyes still on the departing vehicle. He saw something, unclean, in the guesthouse courtyard last night. It scared him so bad he had a heart attack. It turned out the guest had gotten drunk and booked a room in the courtyard to sleep it off. He woke up in the middle of the night, mostly sober, to the sound of someone knocking on his door. He got up and opened it, but there was no one there. He'd just lie back down when the knocking would start again. This went on for over an hour. Finally, the guest lost his temper. The next time the knocking started, he crept to the door and flung it open, ready to give the prankster a piece of his mind. But standing in the doorway was a woman in a red dress, holding a baby. Her head was bowed, her face hidden by a curtain of long, black hair. "Is my husband here?" she asked, her voice low and strange. "Could you get him for me? I just want to ask him why he abandoned me and our child." The guest, unsettled by her bizarre behavior, was about to ask if she had the wrong room when the woman suddenly thrust the bundled infant toward him. In the dim yellow light, he saw that the baby was just a broken, dilapidated doll with cracked skin and a missing jaw. His scalp tingled with fear. The woman snapped her head up, her voice turning into a piercing shriek. He's such a beautiful child. How could he be so cruel as to abandon him? When he saw her face, the empty, black sockets of her eyes and the blood streaming from her nose and mouth, the guest let out a scream, clutched his chest, and collapsed. He was the only guest in the courtyard that night. If old Donald hadn't found him on his rounds and called an ambulance, he probably would have died. The guest told old Donald the whole terrifying story himself while they were waiting for the paramedics. After that, the story of the woman in red spread like wildfire. David, the boss, had to pay tens of thousands in compensation, and the resort's reputation was ruined. The ghost story scared away most of our regular customers, and business plummeted. Watching his business die a slow death, David was starting to get desperate. David was a self-made man who had built his business from nothing. He prided himself on being worldly and didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions. He was convinced the hauntings were a dirty trick played by the rival resort next door to steal his customers. After all, since the ghost story started, a lot of his regulars had started going there instead. To prove the rumors were baseless and to stop his competitors from pulling any more stunts, David called all the servers for a meeting one morning. He announced that he wanted 2 employees to stay in the guesthouse courtyard. Whoever volunteered would get a raise and a free guest room to use as a dorm. A private room with air conditioning, a TV, and its own bathroom was a massive upgrade from the staff dorms. But with the recent hauntings, none of the servers were willing to go. Seeing the hesitation, David's patience wore thin. He pointed a finger right at us. "Ben, Leo. You two are moving into the courtyard tonight." After a string of terrifying incidents, I wanted nothing to do with that place. I was about to refuse, but Leo cut me off, happily accepting on my behalf. "You can count on us, David. Ben and I will keep a close eye on the courtyard for you." After the meeting, I pulled Leo aside, annoyed. "Are you crazy? After what just happened, you actually want to move in there? Are you not scared? Have you already forgotten who ran out of the bathroom naked?" After the incident in the bathroom, Leo had been avoiding the courtyard for days. His sudden change of heart made no sense. What's a grown man got to be afraid of? Leo was grinning, back to his old fearless self. "Besides," he added, "people pay hundreds of dollars to stay in those rooms. The boss is paying us to live there. It's a free upgrade." I scowled. "If you want to stay in a guest room, you go. Leave me out of it." Seeing I was serious, Leo finally told me the truth. "Okay, look. What happened in the bathroom that night, it wasn't a ghost," he said with a dry laugh. "It was Wang and the guys from the kitchen. They were playing mahjong late and stopped by the courtyard for a leak on their way back. They heard us talking in the stalls and decided to mess with us by putting on a woman's voice. They were long gone by the time we ran out. Wang told me the whole story last night when we were playing cards. So it was Wang and his crew." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Good thing they left when they did, or your naked secret would be out. Leo rubbed his nose, embarrassed, and quickly changed the subject back to the guest who ended up in the hospital. "I heard from Sue, the server who waited on his table, that the guy drank a ton that night. He was so wasted he was hugging a chair in the dining hall, pretending it was a beautiful woman. I bet he was just drunk and mistook that old pomegranate tree with all its red flowers for a ghost." Leo clapped me on the shoulder with a grin. "So relax. There's no such thing as ghosts. Let's go enjoy our new room." "If there are no ghosts," I said, "why didn't you just say so when David was here? And miss out on this sweet deal?" Leo said with a sly wink. I still felt a little uneasy. "But what about what old Donald said? You actually believe a word that comes out of that man's mouth?" Leo was getting impatient. "Dude, stop being such a baby. Don't be scared of every little thing. Tell you what, I'll go get some of old Donald's fruit wine. We'll have a couple of drinks tonight to give you some liquid courage. How's that? That evening, after work, Leo made good on his promise and got a small bottle of fruit wine from old Donald. We went to our new double room in the courtyard. Besides the main courtyard with the flower bed, our room also opened up to a small, private garden on the other side. The bed near the main door had a perfect view of the pomegranate tree and its blood-red flowers. Since that tree always made my skin crawl, I chose the bed closer to the small garden. After picking our beds, we cranked up the AC, poured some drinks, and watched TV. It was pure bliss. Old Donald had told us the fruit wine was made from wild cherries he'd picked from the mountains near his hometown. It went down smooth, but man, did it have a kick. After just a few glasses, both Leo and I were feeling dizzy. We lay down and were out in minutes. I don't know how long I was asleep, but in my dreams, I felt something like fine threads brushing against my face. It was a soft, tickling sensation, like 1,000 tiny insects crawling all over me. It was maddening. Annoyed, I figured it was just a mosquito. I swatted at my face a few times, but it didn't help. I groggily opened my eyes, planning to get up and light a mosquito coil. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, a woman's blank, emotionless face suddenly materialized right in front of mine. In the darkness, her lifeless face hung suspended above me, her eyes two bottomless black pits staring straight into me. Her long, black hair cascaded down like 1,000 tiny black worms, crawling over my face, trying to force their way into my nose, my eyes, my mouth. My back was cold as ice, but I couldn't move. No matter how hard I struggled, my body was pinned down. I could only stare into those black hole eyes, letting the terror consume me bit by bit. Ah! I don't know how much time passed, but I finally screamed and shot upright. Bright, blinding sunlight filtered down through the leaves above me, dappling my face. I rubbed my heavy head and let out a long breath. Jesus, it was just a dream. Scared the hell out of me. Wait. I fell asleep in the guest room. Where did these leaves and sunlight come from? To my horror, I realized I was lying on the tiled ground of the small garden. My mind went blank, and a wave of cold dread washed over me. Ah! Oh my God! Before I could even process my confusion, a terrified scream erupted from the guest room. It was Leo. I scrambled to my feet and burst back into the room. Leo was on the floor, his face pale as a sheet, having rolled off the bed. He was staring at the wall, letting out hysterical screams. A ghost. It's a ghost. I followed his terrified gaze to the wall beside my bed. The pristine white surface was covered with more than a dozen bloody handprints of various sizes. Bright red blood dripped from the edges of each palm print, creating a grotesque and terrifying pattern that made my blood run cold. David rushed over as soon as he got the call. He stared at the bloody handprints, his face white with shock, speechless for a long moment. When Leo and I had gone to bed, the door had been locked from the inside. It was impossible for anyone to have gotten in. If it wasn't something supernatural, there was no other explanation for the bloody handprints on the wall. After a long silence, David decided to find an expert to take a look at the courtyard. Conveniently, old Donald said he knew a very powerful Taoist priest from his hometown. Overjoyed, David immediately told him to bring the priest to the resort. With the ghost stories scaring everyone away, the resort was dead. The news that a priest was coming to perform an exorcism drew a crowd of staff members, including me and Leo. We watched as the priest performed a noisy ritual in the courtyard. Before leaving, he pulled David aside, gave him a few paper talismans, and said something to him. Whatever it was, it left David looking terrified. That very day, he locked the gate to the guesthouse courtyard and forbade anyone from entering. One night, after a late game of cards with some other servers, I realized the water was off again when I went to take a shower. I looked for Leo to go with me to get water, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I ended up having to haul the bucket from the boiler room by myself. On my way back, as I passed the guesthouse courtyard, I saw a faint glimmer of firelight coming from inside the locked gate. Even though I was terrified, my curiosity got the better of me. I tiptoed to the gate and peered through a crack in the door. The night sky was dominated by a full, round moon. In its pale, ghostly light, I saw two dark figures. The recent hauntings flashed through my mind, and I was overcome with fear. I didn't dare stay a second longer. I turned and ran. For the next couple of weeks, nothing strange happened at the resort. David spent a lot of money trying to win back customers, even hiring a local TV station to film a promotional video for the resort. The day of the shoot was bright and sunny, a perfect day for filming. David set up a dozen banquet tables in the main dining hall and invited all his relatives, friends, and business partners for a big meal. The resort, which had been deserted for weeks, was finally bustling with life again. The promo shoot was going smoothly. After filming a few segments with David in the dining hall, he was about to lead the news crew to another location when Leo ran up. He said a few of David's most important clients had arrived and were looking for him. David told me to take over and show the news crew around while he went to greet his guests. I was in the middle of setting tables at the time. I led the crew to the garden. After they filmed one spot, we were heading to the next when Old Donald suddenly appeared from behind a rockery, walking with such stiff movements that he almost bumped right into me. I jumped back. "Old Donald. What are you doing? You scared me." He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the empty space behind me. "David wants you back in the dining hall. I'm taking over with the camera crew." As he spoke, his gaze was vacant and unfocused, and his tone was strangely robotic. I didn't think much of it at the time. "Okay, Old Donald. You can take them. I've got some things to finish up in the restaurant anyway." Old Donald just stood there, rigid and silent. I had already walked a good distance away when I heard his cold, mechanical voice ring out again. "Next location, the guesthouse courtyard." The guesthouse courtyard? But David had locked it up after the haunting and told everyone to stay out. Why would they be filming there? Something felt wrong. I instinctively turned and glanced back. In the distance, I saw Old Donald leading the news crew toward the courtyard. Maybe it was my imagination, but his walk seemed stiff and unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by strings. It was deeply unsettling. I had just gotten back to the dining hall when I ran into David, who was returning after meeting his clients. "Hey, didn't I tell you to keep filming with the crew? What are you doing back here?" "David, you don't remember?" I said. "You sent Old Donald to take over for me." David looked baffled. "When did I say that? Where's the crew now?" "I think Old Donald took them to film in the guesthouse courtyard," I said. "What?" David's eye twitched violently. He turned and sprinted toward the courtyard. I knew something was definitely wrong now, so I ran after him. When we got to the courtyard, the locked gate was wide open. David and I rushed inside. The news crew and Old Donald were all standing under the pomegranate tree. The reporters, probably having never seen a pomegranate tree so full of blossoms, were filming it from every possible angle. Old Donald stood with his back to the gate, perfectly still under the tree, like a stone statue. The blood-red petals had fallen all over him. "Old Donald, do you even want this job anymore?" David roared, his anger boiling over. He stomped over and grabbed Donald's shoulder. "Who told you to bring the reporters in here?" Old Donald swayed slightly, then slowly, mechanically, turned his head. His eyes were vacant as he stared at David. He let out two sharp, cackling laughs. "Honey, I finally found you. I knew you wouldn't be so cruel as to abandon us." The voice and the mannerisms were those of a young woman. David froze, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. Who are you?" I was stunned. The reporters all stared at old Donald in shock. A soft, gentle expression, one you'd see on a woman's face, appeared on old Donald's wrinkled features. "Honey, if I'd had the baby, he'd be several years old by now. You've never even seen him, have you? Why don't I call him out so you can meet him?" With that, old Donald's eyes rolled back in his head. His body convulsed violently, and after a moment, his eyes blinked open, now filled with a childlike innocence. "Daddy! Daddy! I finally found you." The innocent look, combined with old Donald's wrinkled face and aged voice, was beyond bizarre. It was terrifying. David stumbled backward in fear. I and the reporters were all too scared to speak. But driven by a morbid curiosity, none of us left. The cameraman, his face alight with excitement, even swung his camera around and started filming old Donald. Suddenly, old Donald's face crumpled, like a pouting child. "Daddy, I was so cute. Why didn't you want me?" Sob. "Do you know how much it hurt? When you killed Mommy, I was in her tummy, and it hurt so much. Daddy, it hurts. I can't breathe." Old Donald lowered his head, clawing at his chest and gasping for air. Then he snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot and menacing. He shot his hands out and wrapped them around David's throat. His voice changed back to the woman's. It was a piercing shriek, filled with a bone-deep hatred. "Come down here and join us." "Ah!" David struggled wildly. Old Donald abruptly released him, and David stumbled backward, crashing hard against the pomegranate tree. With a loud crack, the hollow trunk snapped at its base and came crashing down. A heavily decomposed skeleton tumbled out of the broken tree and scattered across the ground. A white, spherical object rolled out from the pile of bones and came to a stop at David's feet. It was a human skull, clumps of a woman's long, dark hair still clinging to it. The courtyard erupted in a symphony of terrified screams. The police arrived soon after the skeleton was discovered in the courtyard. The forensics team quickly identified the remains as belonging to Eliza, David's wife, who had mysteriously vanished 7 months into her pregnancy. Years ago, David had an affair with a woman he met at a bar while his wife was pregnant. When Eliza found out, David dropped all pretense and demanded a divorce. He'd planned to give Eliza a small settlement and marry his mistress, but Eliza demanded half of all their assets. Even though they had built their fortune together, giving up half of it was like cutting off a limb for David. To avoid splitting his assets, David pretended to apologize to Eliza. He lured his pregnant wife to the resort, killed her, and buried her body under the pomegranate tree in the courtyard. It was her body, feeding the roots, that had caused the tree to bloom with such a profusion of fiery, blood-red flowers. Not long after Eliza disappeared, David married the woman from the bar. At the time, the police suspected him in Eliza's disappearance. But with no body, they couldn't prove anything, and the case was eventually classified as a missing persons case and went cold. Now that her body had been found, the police barely had to interrogate him. David, nearly driven mad with terror, confessed to everything. He was quickly tried and sentenced to death. As for the bar girl he'd worked so hard to marry, she didn't even wait for the verdict. She took all his money and vanished. They say that during his final days in prison, David spent every waking moment screaming at the empty air, begging Eliza's ghost to leave him alone. On the day of his execution, he was a complete wreck, covered in his own filth, having been scared completely out of his mind. After he came to, old Donald claimed to have no memory of what happened in the courtyard that day. He just stared blankly at the police, unable to answer any of their questions. Although the police found his behavior suspicious, their investigation confirmed he had no connection to Eliza's murder, so they eventually let him go. The footage captured by the news crew, which documented almost the entire event from Donald's possession to the discovery of Eliza's bones, went viral online. The consensus on the internet was that the ghost of Eliza, along with her unborn child, had possessed old Donald to exact revenge on her heartless monster of a husband. The resort was shut down because of the murder case. All the employees got their final paychecks and went their separate ways. One day, I went back to the resort to pack up my things. While waiting for the bus, I ran into Leo, who was there for the same reason. It was the first time I'd seen him since the whole story about David came out. I frowned and stared at him for a long moment. "Leo, is there anything you want to tell me? What's that supposed to mean?" Leo looked a little guilty, but he tried to play it off with a laugh. "You make it sound like I did something to you behind your back. If you don't know what you need to explain, maybe I can help you connect the dots." Seeing he was still playing dumb, I decided to lay it all out. "That fruit wine you got from old Donald that night in the guest room, I looked it up online a few days ago. The juice of that particular fruit contains a mild toxin. It's not enough to poison someone, but it does have a slight paralyzing effect on the body. Also, on the night of the 15th, I saw two shadowy figures in the courtyard. One was burning spirit money under the pomegranate tree, and the other was digging. If I'm not mistaken, the one burning money was David. And the other one was you." Leo froze. He pursed his lips and hesitated for a long time before finally speaking. "Eliza was my sister. My biological sister. When I was little, I got really sick. My parents borrowed money from every relative they knew, but it still wasn't enough for my treatment. So they gave my sister up for adoption to a childless couple in exchange for $5,000 to pay for my medical bills. Because of that, I always felt like I owed her. As soon as I was old enough, I started trying to find her. It wasn't until my junior year of high school that I finally tracked her down. Maybe it was because of their blood connection, but despite the years apart, the siblings felt an instant, powerful bond. At the time, Eliza was pregnant and dealing with her husband's affair and the constant harassment from his mistress. Her long-lost brother became her only confidant. When Leo learned what Eliza was going through, he was both heartbroken and furious. He immediately supported her decision to divorce David, raise the child on her own, and fight for her fair share of their assets. With Leo's encouragement, Eliza finally found the courage to go through with it. One day, she sent Leo a message, telling him she was going to the resort to talk to David about the divorce and the division of their property. She said she'd contact him when she got back. But she never did. She vanished without a trace. With no body, the police could only classify it as a missing persons case. Leo, however, had a strong, gut feeling, a kind of psychic link between them, that his sister had been murdered and that David had hidden her body somewhere on the resort grounds. To find out what happened to Eliza, Leo, a top student, gave up his plans for college. He got a job as a server at David's resort and began his own secret investigation. Along the way, he discovered that old Donald's daughter had a congenital heart defect and that Eliza had paid for her expensive, life-saving surgery. He managed to convince the grateful old man to help him investigate David and find out what happened to Eliza. Leo watched David for over a year. He noticed that David was constantly renovating and redecorating the resort's tea rooms, restaurant, and game rooms to attract customers. Yet the guest house courtyard, with its peeling paint, was left completely untouched. That, combined with the strange, haunted look on David's face whenever he passed the courtyard, convinced Leo that Eliza's body was hidden there. But the courtyard was large, and he had no idea where to start looking. To avoid tipping off David and giving him a chance to move the body, Leo didn't act immediately. Instead, he and old Donald worked together. They downloaded scary audio files and dressed in red to create the illusion of a haunting, building up the ghost story around the courtyard. To make David truly believe that Eliza's ghost was haunting the place, Leo deliberately gave me the drugged fruit wine that night in the guest room. Then, while I was disoriented, he dressed up as a woman in red with disheveled hair and sat by my bed, making me think I'd had a real supernatural encounter. The bloody handprints on the wall? That was his handiwork too, done while I was passed out. With me as a witness and the physical evidence of the handprints, David finally believed Eliza's ghost was back for revenge. He decided to hire an expert to deal with her. This was Leo's chance. He hired an actor to pose as a priest and had old Donald recommend him to David. The fake priest performed a bogus ceremony and then privately told David that the ghost's resentment was incredibly strong. He said his ritual was only a temporary fix. For a permanent solution, David himself had to burn several special talismans at the exact spot where the ghost had died, precisely at midnight on the 15th of the month. Otherwise, the priest warned, the ghost's rage would be unstoppable, bringing David endless misfortune, from financial ruin to being unable to have children. Because David had a guilty conscience, and because his new wife had indeed failed to get pregnant after all this time, he bought the fake priest story completely. On the night of the 15th, at the stroke of midnight, he snuck into the courtyard and burned the talismans under the pomegranate tree, the very spot where he had buried Eliza. Of course, he had no idea that Leo was hiding nearby, watching his every move. After David left, Leo dug under the tree and found his sister's remains. But he didn't call the police right away. Even if David was convicted of murder, he'd just get the death penalty. That was too easy for the bastard who had killed his sister. He wanted David to face the law, but he also wanted every remaining day of his life to be a living hell of fear and torment. A few days later, when David hired the TV crew, Leo saw his chance. He hid Eliza's bones inside the hollow trunk of the pomegranate tree. Then, on the day of the shoot, he and old Donald worked together to lure David into their final, terrifying trap. After he finished his story, Leo let out a long breath, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted. "I'm sorry, Ben. From the beginning, I asked you to come work here so I could use you to make the ghost story seem real." He looked at me, his face full of guilt. "I heard you're heading off to school tomorrow. I was going to buy you a farewell dinner. But now that you know everything, I guess that's not going to happen." He saw that I wasn't saying anything and figured our friendship was over. He sighed and turned to leave. Suddenly, a hand landed on his shoulder. "Do you have any idea how scared I was that night in the guest room?" I said, feigning anger. "You think you can just get away with pulling something like that on me? I'll tell you what. For dinner tonight, if you don't spend at least half a month's salary, then all our years as friends meant nothing." Leo stared at me, surprised, then broke into a huge grin when he realized I wasn't mad. "You name the place. Forget half a month's salary, I'll let you bankrupt me tonight." With that, his old, carefree, mischievous self returned. He threw an arm around my neck, and we headed off toward the best restaurant in town.